what we're really trying to do is foster a relationship where the donor, feels valued and they're able to really feel connected to the impact that they're having through their gift. That's the magic.
Welcome to Crazy Good Turns. We recognize and celebrate people who do crazy good things for others, and I'm your host, Frank Blake. Our guest today is Tim Kachuriak. Tim is like a walking crazy good turn himself. He is the founder of NextAfter. NextAfter helps nonprofits discover why their donors give, helps them reach out to more donors and raise more money. Here's the mission of his organization, as he stated it: to create a generation that embraces widespread, pervasive, personal generosity. And as if that weren't ambitious enough, Tim is also the author of several books, is one of two hosts of the Generosity Freak Show podcast. He speaks frequently on the topic of generosity and is on the board of several nonprofits. Other than that, Tim, I guess you waste your time. What a privilege it is to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Let me start with your goal of making this the most generous generation in history. How did that become your goal? And if you tell our listeners how NextAfter, your organization, fits with that goal.
It's something that's actually kind of emerged, honestly. I worked in the field of advertising marketing, both in the for-profit space and the nonprofit space for a period of time. And when I crossed over to the nonprofit world, I just became really enamored with like this miracle of generosity. Like every time somebody gives a gift, it's truly a miracle. And it's kind of like the more that you get of that drug, the harder it is to stop. So what NextAfter has really focused on for the last 8 or so years is really trying to decode what works in fundraising and then get that into the hands of as many nonprofit organizations as we possibly can so that we can help to really influence the unleashing of the most generous generation of all time. So that's kind of really where we fit.
Very interesting. So what got you focused on this? I mean, you said you've got a marketing background. That's where your expertise is. What got you focused on philanthropic fundraising, and what was the decision process to establish NextAfter?
It kind of starts right after I graduated college. So I graduated college right after 9/11, which was a horrible time to enter into the job force, especially for somebody who wanted to break into digital marketing. But I was fortunate enough. I worked at a country club all during high school and college. And I had, like I used to joke, I had 432 uncles and aunts that were captains of industry, right? So I went to one of the guys who was actually the president of the country club. He was also the president of the second largest ad agency in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And I said, hey, can I meet with you? Met with him, did my little dog and pony show. He's like, oh man, I'd love to hire you. But you know what? 9/11, it hit our industry hard, our agency harder. I'm sorry, I can't help you. We just laid off 30 people yesterday. So 6 months kind of wandering in the wilderness, I ended up meeting a serial entrepreneur on a golf course, actually. And he had me do a couple projects for him. And he said, well, why don't you start your own business, kid? And I was like, well, I don't know how to do that. He's like, I do. We've got an incubator on the second floor of our office building, and I'll give you a desk. I'll introduce you to people, and the rest is up to you, kid. So I did that for 5 years, and it was great. And I had nothing to lose. I was living in my parents' basement, so not married, no kids. And I loved that. But I was always more of a cause guy, right? And so about 5 years into it, my church was doing a capital campaign to build a new building. And I had our little marketing company do all the marketing materials for that. And it was that first time that I was doing something that I felt like I was like wired to do, but for a cause I cared about. And, once I kind of got that flavor in my mouth, I couldn't really get rid of the taste. So shortly after that, I ended up selling my business. I moved from Pittsburgh to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I went to work for a nonprofit organization down there. And that was kind of my first taste of being inside of that world. And I was so amazed that there was like basically these advertising agencies that work exclusively with nonprofits. And we worked with one that was based out of Dallas. And one of the founders of that company said, hey, why don't you come to Dallas? We've been doing direct mail for 30 years, and we're really trying to break into this digital world. Maybe you could help us start that division. So that's where I kind of got into this space. And through that process, I just became obsessed with trying to figure out, how do we optimize giving? How do we make it easier for people to give? How do we make giving actually a positive experience for donors? And that's what kind of ultimately led to the founding of NextAfter.
The amazing thing to me on your site is how much information you just put out there for free for people to see, sort of A/B testing. This works, this doesn't work. I mean, it's fascinating.
Well, we've learned we have to practice what we preach, right? So if we want to be generous, we have to be generous with the things that we've been entrusted. What NextAfter specifically does is we've started what is now the world's largest digital fundraising research lab. And we focus on doing two kinds of research. The first kind is what I refer to more as like forensic research, where we're analyzing large amounts of data across the nonprofit sector. And then the other part is where we use the web as basically a laboratory where we can actually run rigorous scientific experiments to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it's amazing because a lot of things honestly fly in the face of conventional wisdom or intuition. So it's been a fascinating journey for sure.
So what are those things that are counterintuitive that you've discovered?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that we think about digital marketing or fundraising as kind of a funnel where people kind of come to the website from various different channels, whether they get there from social media or from search engines or from emails or offline campaigns like radio and TV. And the concept of the funnel is that people just gradually kind of move through this thing through organic processes. But what we've learned is that that's not the case at all, right? And actually, we've kind of taken the funnel and flipped it upside down and said, no, it's more of a mountain, right? So that the donor, to get to the top of the mountain where they actually make a financial gift to support an organization that they care about, they have to go through a series of work, and it's hard and it's not easy. And we actually make it harder for them by, not communicating clearly, by putting very friction-laden processes before people. And so what we try to do is say, what can we do to make it easier for people to get?
Behaviorally, do you find the prompter for why people give, why they climb that mountain that you described? How do you get that desire to climb the mountain? What is it when you're consulting with folks?
The key is really helping the organization to discover their unique value proposition, right? For example, I send an email to you, right? And the goal of the email is ultimately to get you to go give a donation to my organization. Well, there's a series of these micro decisions that you have to make in order to complete that journey, right? So the first decision is, do I open this email? Do I delete it or do I ignore it, right? If you make a decision to open, you have to make a decision to read, and maybe to keep reading, and then maybe to click, right? Yeah. And then as you click, you get to, the website and the landing page, and there's a series of these micro decisions that you have to make as you navigate the content, the copy, the images, the video, whatever is on that page. And if the content's compelling, if it's inspiring, you might click the donate button. And then you go through this donation experience. And there's even a series of decisions you make as you complete the transaction. Do I want to give a one-time gift or recurring gift? How much do I want to give? Do I want to designate my gift in some way? How do I want to pay? These are all little decisions the donor makes. So when we think about value proposition, we say, look, at any of those decision points, the potential donor could bail out of the process altogether, right? They could just say no at any point, and it undoes all of the work that's accomplished to that point. So that's where we target these experiments. We say, how do we communicate more value at this specific moment to get them to continue to say yes along this journey? And if we can do that over and over and over again, we can build a continuous unbroken chain of these micro yeses. We can get more people to the top of the mountain and ultimately influence greater giving. So that's really how we think about it.
As you've looked at this, are there personal behavioral traits that have come through to you? Are some people more innately generous? Can you identify sort of here, these people are more given to generosity, or an appeal to this kind of emotion is more likely to yield generosity?
I don't know if it's a specific persona or personality type, but one of the things that we find oftentimes is that as a nonprofit organization, we fail to help the donor understand the reasons why they should give. So I'll give you a very practical example. So if you look at a lot of donation pages for nonprofit organizations, it's just a form that you fill out, right? So you fill out your contact information, your payment information, you hit the submit button, and then your donation goes through. But the problem with that is that's all cost and no value. And so one of the simple things that we've tested and we found over and over again is by actually putting more copy, putting more words on the page that actually relates to the donor, the reasons why they should give, it makes a huge difference. And when people see that, they're like, man, who's going to read all that text? Well, you know who's going to read the text? The people that are your ideal donors will read that text. So it's things like that are just very counterintuitive. Another example is emails. So if I showed you some examples of different email tests that we've run, most emails sent from nonprofits are highly designed. They got graphics and images and buttons. And we test just sending plain text emails, like an email that I would send from me to you, right? So from Tim to Frank, where it's very plain text, the language is very clearly communicated, and it increases results by 300% or more in fundraising. So it's things like that are kind of counterintuitive to a lot of folks that have been doing this for a while.
So what kind of tests will you typically run? What's an example of, I come in and I say, hey, Tim, can you help me?
The first thing that we'll typically do is really study the organization. We go through and pour through all of their data. We look for where is the greatest opportunity to move people to the very next step of the journey. And then we'll map out like a design of experiments. If you think about it, the web is kind of like the greatest behavioral laboratory that's ever existed, because I can serve version A of my page and version B of my page, and every other person gets a different version of that. And then I can monitor what the data suggests works. And so we do that. We'll map out different experiments, everything from like testing different Facebook ads to testing different landing pages to email campaigns to social media posts, and we'll just look at what the data tells us. And oftentimes it's the very unintuitive things that end up working.
When organizations come knocking at your door, do you find that they're receptive to your insights, or that we've all got these notions ingrained on how you raise money and you put on an event and you have somebody on the stage who's got a compelling story to tell, and then everybody bids at table? I mean, what do you find from the organizations themselves?
I think they're initially attracted by data. I mean, you mentioned earlier, we have 2,500 different experiments that we've run, and we open source it. It's all published online. And I think that data becomes very compelling for these organizations. They see, there's a lot of gurus and, industry leaders in our space. And it's like, trust me, I'm a doctor, right? We kind of bring to the table like real behavioral based data that says, no, this works versus this. And I think that that's very attractive to people.
Why do you think it is that most nonprofits stay what I'd say is subscale, just have a really hard time scaling up? Why is that?
I think there's a number of reasons. Number one, I think nonprofits are incredibly risk averse, right? And probably for good reason. But I think what sometimes happens is that by being risk averse, we sometimes fail to assess the risk of not trying something new. And as a businessman, like, you understand this. I mean, this is part of actually, really getting ahead and moving and advancing the organization, is taking calculated and mitigated risks. So I think that that's also something that's really interesting about the testing and experimentation we do, is we give people the opportunity to try something new, but at the same time mitigating some of the risk. So instead of like betting the farm on something, we can actually run a small scale micro test, look at the data, and then make our play from there.
Is the statistic right that roughly 2% of the population gives to a nonprofit in a year? Is that the correct?
That is sadly correct, and it's been that way like since they've tracked it for the last 40, 50 years.
If you said, here's a goal for the country that you might be able to help the country achieve, what do you think that percentage could be? I mean, doubling it's 4%, and it still seems mighty small.
As an optimizer, you're never done until you reach 100%. That's, what we try to instill with the folks that we work with, is that you're never really done, right? You're never really done until you get 100% of results 100% of the time. But I mean, you're right. If we could double it, if we could increase it by 50%, I mean, that would be billions and billions and billions of dollars. $450 billion was donated to charities last year. So if you could, increase that by 50%, it's significant.
Have you noticed a change with the pandemic? Has that changed how people have given or what motivates their giving?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So when everything started to really shut down a lot of travel and people were on lockdown, like in early March, we set up this tracking study. So we took 160 different organizations from 12 different industry verticals. We monitored all of their email communications, and we're continuing to monitor them. And one of the big shifts that we've seen is because a lot of the in-person events have been shut down, a lot of the face-to-face kind of communication has pretty much stopped. There's been a significant increase in the volume of digital communications that are going out. So like really digital is becoming much more of the lifeline for these organizations. And what was also interesting, we tracked all the giving for 90 different organizations. And what we found is during this time that actually digital giving has increased by 30% year over year compared to 2019, that same period of time.
Which is consistent with retail sales, by the way.
So and so that's encouraging, but I also think it could create another challenge, right? And because one of the challenges I think with digital communication is that it's very cheap, right? It doesn't really cost me much to go and just start blasting a bunch of people with a bunch of emails. And I think the danger is that it could lead to the proliferation of really, really bad communication from organizations. We always talk about that, people give to people. They don't give to websites. They don't give to emails. They don't give to direct mail letters. People give to people.
That's a great point right there.
And there's a danger, that sometimes with all of the technology that we can actually lose our humanity. We can lose touch with the fact that this, what we're really trying to do is foster a relationship where the donor, feels valued and they're able to really feel connected to the impact that they're having through their gift. That's the magic. When that happens, it gets really, really exciting.
You said recently that finding out about why people give isn't a deep enough question, that you want to find out what makes people care. All right, so that's another level of profound question. How do you go about answering that?
Well, I mean, we're doing it through some of our research, but there's been a lot of stuff that's been done over the last 10 years or so on this specific topic. I'll give you one specific example. Dr. Karen Wynn, she's at Yale University. She is a PhD in psychology, professor, and then she also runs this thing called the Baby Lab, which sounds really weird, but it's actually really cool. So what they do is they do different behavioral research with infant children, so up to like 18 months. So these kids, they can't speak, they don't talk yet, and she observes their behavior. So one particular experiment that I found was really interesting. She has this little puppet theater set up. And in the puppet theater, there's two puppets on either side. Then there's the box in the center of the table. Then a third puppet comes in. It's a little duck. And inside that box is a rattle. And the duck is trying to open the box. And then puppet number one comes over, helps the duck open the box. It gets the rattle, and everybody's happy. So then they reset the stage. Same scenario, puppet on either side, box in the center. Chicken comes out, struggling, trying to open the box. Puppet number two comes over, stomps on the box, right? Stomps it closed. And so then what they do is they take those two puppets, the one that were on either side, they hold them out an arm's length of the child. And in almost every instance, the child chooses the caring and compassionate puppet versus the mean one. What that suggests is that compassion is something that's almost hardwired into us. It's not something that we actually have to be taught. It's almost part of the fabric of our nature. That gets me really excited because that suggests that compassion and caring for other people is really something that's innate. And we just have to kind of remove some of the things that we've the calluses that we put on ourselves, just as we've kind of gone through the battles of life and unlock that. So that's really exciting stuff.
If you were to say to our audience, if there are a few things that people need to know about philanthropy and giving and generosity, these are some of the things you ought to know, you ought to understand.
Well, the first one is it's good for you. There's research that suggests that giving actually really helps the giver as much as the person that they're trying to help. That's one thing. And there's a whole bunch of research around that. Number two, it's that, find organizations and causes that really kind of stir your imagination, right? That really kind of speak to your heart in terms of like what you care about. Maybe if there's changes you want to see in the world, or if there's wrongs that you want to see righted. I mean, those are the kind of things that, people really get a lot of satisfaction from when they're giving to something that's really aligned with who they are as a person.
I have a kind of general point of view on philanthropic organizations, and we've had some people on in the past talk about this, that there's too much anxiety around, the direct spend of dollars. And, if this were a business, you'd view your marketing spend very, very differently than most nonprofits do. And it almost seems like donors have this odd restriction of, hey, we don't want to see more than X% go to, anything other than direct to your beneficiaries. Do you run into that a lot? Do you try to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge problem in our industry. What it comes down to is we're measuring the wrong metric. We're measuring efficiency and not impact. And I always like to give an example. Like, imagine there's two organizations, right? One is $1 million organization, and they have 99% efficiency, which means 99 cents out of every dollar goes directly to whatever it is that they're doing, right? And the other one's a $100 million organization, and they've got 50% efficiency, meaning 50 cents out of the dollar is going to the field. The other stuff is, overhead or marketing. Which one's creating more impact? I mean, it's an obvious point, right?
Right.
And that's just something that I think a lot of people are starting to grasp, right? That this is just measuring the wrong stuff.
To me, it's one of the things that thwarts are getting past the 2% number.
Right.
I love the efficiency versus impact. That's a great way to describe it. From a business perspective, you just measure the impact. The efficiency is fascinating, but tell me what the impact is. So I don't want to put you in a difficult spot of having to choose amongst your clients, because I'm sure you love them all. But do you have an example of, here's an organization that came to us and open-minded, and here's what's been able to happen since?
Yeah, I'd probably have to say Hillsdale College is a great example. We've worked with them for a number of years. And when we started with them, they had been doing direct mail for probably 40, 50 years. And they were just dipping their toe in the water with digital fundraising. They really kind of leaned into this opportunity to grow that as a channel of revenue, but also as a platform for what they see as their mission, which is really educating America. They say that they're America's college, right? And they do that by giving away their courseware. And the neat thing about that is that gives us the opportunity to get people to experience the value proposition of the college, so that when we then ask them to give a gift, they have a much greater understanding as to really, the benefit. But they've been really great. I mean, they've grown 10x in the last 5 years. So that's been really exciting to see the growth that's come from that as well.
So I want to ask a series of questions that of late I'm asking a lot of the people who appear on the podcast. And the first is, what's the craziest good turn that anyone's ever done for you?
The craziest good turn. I would have to say, when I first graduated college and I was looking for a job, and nobody would give me a shot. And this guy, his name is John Vento. He was that serial entrepreneur I mentioned. He just took interest in me. He said, "Look, I'll be your partner. I'll help set you up, and I'll help kind of give you a chance." And honestly, that changed the complete trajectory of my career. Honestly, because I had no intentions of starting a business. I wasn't entrepreneurial, but it really suits me, and I love it. And it's really kind of created the foundation for what would ultimately become NextAfter. So, I mean, that was a huge, I guess, change in direction from what I had anticipated for my life. So that was a big one.
Is there an example of where you took that and you turned around that and did something for someone else who was just, equally, gee, I wasn't thinking about this, and now you're kind of launched them on a path?
Yeah, I mean, we try to do it every day, Frank, honestly.
Yeah, good for you.
One of the things we talk about is we want to err on the side of generosity, right? So if we really want to unleash this widespread, pervasive generosity, we have to practice it in everything. And again, it's why we try to be very liberal with the things that we have. Instead of holding on to this stuff, saying this is our proprietary stuff, we want to give it freely and just see what happens. And it's been really surprising. Great things happen.
So what's one piece of advice that stuck with you from either your parents or somebody you worked with, a piece of advice that if you had, you'd put that one on your table, to your desk, to look at it every day?
Always be curious, right? Always be curious. I think that's something that is really shared by a lot of the folks that we work with, is this insatiable intellectual curiosity. I just want to see what happens, right? And that kind of opens up the opportunity for innovations and breakthroughs, right? So curiosity is a big one.
So if there was one person, not a famous person, unless it just happens to be some famous person that you know, but someone that you know whose life you'd say, boy, I really admire the way that person has lived her or his life, that you'd call out and say, wow, that's what I want to do. Yeah.
His name is Tom McCabe. He was my former boss at an agency I worked at in Dallas, and we're still very good friends. He's such a statesman in a way that he approaches everything. He ran a company like mine, but 30 years ago, for 30 years. And just the way that he is with his family, the way that he always was with his staff, the way that he just is in the community. He's just an incredible man and somebody I admire greatly. And honestly, I say all the time, I said, when I grow up, I want to be Tom McCabe.
That's very cool. We had a guest on recently who talked about having a generosity guru. She said, this person's my generosity guru. Is Tom McCabe sort of that person for you?
He is. He kind of taught me the theology of giving, if you will, right? Where it's really an incredible thing that happens when somebody gives a gift to another organization, and really it's an irrational thing. It doesn't make sense because they don't naturally get like a tangible benefit back. It's not like buying a product. So there's something special that happens there, and he just really unlocked my perspective on that.
If you were to answer the question, boy, if somebody really knew me, they would know this about me, what is it?
Wow. If they really knew me, they would know that despite what I project, which is, confidence and right, innovation, that, I have bouts of incredible insecurity where I feel, like an imposter, or, that I'm not really the person that I want people to think I am. We host a conference every year. And for some reason, like the night before that conference, I absolutely lose my mind, and I can't sleep, and I'm worried. And it's because it's like all the people in my world that I care about are there. Like all of our clients are there, all of my staff is there, everybody that we interact with. And it's a very, very dark and humbling time. But then the next day is the greatest day of my life. It's amazing, just the difference. So that's one thing I don't think anybody knows a lot about.
If the listeners want to learn more about you, learn more about what you're doing, obviously they can go to the NextAfter or website. Are there other places for them to find out more, other resources that you direct them to?
One of the things that we've developed over the last couple years is this NextAfter Institute. And really the goal of the Institute is to do more training. We've kind of developed a whole series of different workshops and certification programs, and we've virtualized it now with COVID, so they're all available online. But there's a whole host of other free resources, templates, guides, ebooks, all sorts of things that are available.
So what's the Institute? That sounds pretty interesting.
The Institute really is how we see our opportunity to fulfill our mission fulfillment. So if you think about it, we can only work as a consultancy, we can only work with a small subset of organizations, right? So if we want to be true to our goal, which is unleashing the most generous generation in the history of the world, we have to find a way to amplify or magnify our impact, right? And the Institute's designed to do exactly that. So we want to try to get into the hands of as many people that are working in this space as possible, the resources they need to be more effective in their craft, to really develop this opportunity to run their own experiments and learn from the donors as they go through that. So that's really what the Institute's really designed to do.
That's phenomenal. And then if you said 5 years from now, what is NextAfter doing? What is Tim Kachuriak doing?
Well, I mean, this company and this vision, I think, is big enough to captivate my imagination for the rest of my life. So hopefully, God willing, I'll still be doing this. But where are we headed? So we just launched a new mystery donor study in partnership with Salesforce. It's a global study. So we're in 9 different countries, 6 different languages. And what we're doing is we're giving mystery gifts to 400 different organizations. And then we're monitoring how these organizations communicate with us as the mystery donor. And we're going to publish that. So I think what we're going to probably do is really take a lot more of our research and really explode it out of just North America.
That's awesome. Tim, I can't thank you enough for your time. What you're doing, not only is it fascinating, as you can tell, I love how you approach the problem technically, but also just the heart that you bring to it. Because, as I say, I looked at the first thing when I was preparing for this interview is I went to your site and all this information free. And I know that's not easy to do. Just say, hey, we're going to make this information free. And your objective is such a great objective. Your mission statement is such a terrific mission statement. And I do believe there's so many people with a good heart who want to do well by others, but really need help in thinking about how to do it. And look at the donation part of it as the unseemly part that they really would just as soon not deal with, when it's actually kind of a core to the mission.
That's right. Well, thank you, Frank. Appreciate the opportunity to share this with your audience, and look forward to more crazy good turns.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for your crazy good turn. Thank you, Tim.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As always, I want to thank Megan Hanlon for the production of this podcast and Stephen Key for his editing and score in Los Angeles. Thank you, and until next time, this is Frank Blake.